The Almoravid movement was born south of Al-Andalus, in the Moroccan desert. It had gone from a religious movement to an empire that united the Berber tribes under their banner, and led the expansion into Spain, eventually reaching the Pyrenees to the north. However, now to the south, a new movement was taking shape. Something quite like the Almoravids themselves, that would test the limits of Almoravid power and stability. In the year 1120 CE, during the reign of Ali ibn Yusuf ibn Tashfin, a man named Muhammad ibn Tumart returned to the Maghrib from the east, where he had been studying Islam for years. According to one story, Ibn Tumart studied in Baghdad under Al-Ghazali. He was there when Al-Ghazali wrote his famous book, The Revival of the Religious Sciences. And he was also there when news reached Al-Ghazali that the Almoravids had publicly burned his book. Al-Ghazali was furious, and he made a prophecy because all great stories start with a prophecy. He prophesied that Ibn Tumart, his bright pupil, would bring about the end of the empire's dynasty. This was probably just a story, but legitimacy is an important thing. The interpretation of Islam that he had learned was different than the one Almoravids preached. Almoravids had initially preached a simple and rigid view of Islam, but after they transitioned from a religious movement into an empire, they had pretty much left those ideas. After their founder, Ibn Yasin, died, they installed a council of religious scholars and jurists. This was seen as an impious move because those jurists and scholars could be corrupted. Ibn Tumart tried his best in Marrakesh but failed to gain any followers. He returned to the Atlas Mountains, to the tribe he himself belonged to, the Masmuda. Over the following years, he built quite a following there. Eventually, he and his followers became powerful enough to challenge the Almoravids. Muhammad ibn Tumart called his followers Al-Muwahhidun, those who believed in Tawheed, the oneness of God. The name was deformed into Al-Muhad, which is the name I'll be using from this point on. Ibn Tumart also declared himself Al-Mahdi, the savior of Islam, because why not? He even gained a sizable Shia following when he claimed that he was a descendant of Prophet Muhammad's daughter, Fatima. To be completely honest, the Almoravids and the Almohads taught mostly the same things about religion, but for propaganda purposes, things were exaggerated. Even the name, those who believe in the oneness of God, was a bit of propaganda. The implication being that the rivals of Almohad somehow denied it, even though no Muslim denies the oneness of God. One example that clearly illustrates the Almohads and their beliefs is that when they took over a place called Dinmal, they slaughtered the local population by accusing them of deforming Islam. Unfortunately, the capital of the empire, Marrakesh, wasn't far from the mountains where the Almohad were based. It was largely undefended by natural boundaries, although a string of forts was constructed to protect it. In 1130 CE, the capital itself was besieged by Ibn Tumart. Ali ibn Yusuf was able to muster up enough men to fight back. However, Ibn Tumart was not broken. Unfortunately, he wasn't alive either. He died just a few months after the failed siege. His successor, a man named Abdul Mumin, continued the offensive with more success. Abdul Mumin took the title of the Caliph to give himself more legitimacy, as he was the successor of the man who claimed to be Al-Mahdi himself. By this point, Al-Andalus was pretty much left alone to fend itself. Alfonso I of Aragon led various raiding missions deep into Muslim Spain. He even reached all the way to Granada, but couldn't besiege it. This, in addition to other humiliating defeats, led to discontent amongst the locals. Alfonso is said to have been invited by Christians living under the Almoravids, who weren't treated very well. They were treated poorly and probably called on Alfonso to help them. At one point, they even joined his expedition and went up north with him when he returned. This act of the Christians was declared treason by the Qadi, Abul Walid ibn Rushd, who was the grandfather of the famous philosopher Ibn Rushd or Averroes. Christians were expelled and their monasteries and churches were taken over by the state. As you might expect, sudden expulsion of a large religious group, which might have even been the majority in many cities, led to a considerable decline in jizya in a time when more and more money was needed to fund the war against the Almohad in the south. Hence, taxes on the Muslim population were increased, leading to further discontent. Almoravids had been loved by the people for their victories against the Christians and lack of unjust taxes, but now neither of those was true. Some minor victories were achieved in Al-Andalus, but overall it was a fiasco. Tashfin ibn Ali, the crown prince, was installed as effectively the viceroy of Al-Andalus. He was a capable young man and managed to win some minor victories, but most importantly, he managed to not suffer any major defeats, and Al-Andalus was stabilized by him. When things were getting worse in the south, the north wasn't so bad. Ali ibn Yusuf, the Almoravid ruler, had to call on more and more of Andalusi resources to fight his war. By 1138 CE, when Abdul Mumin was winning victory after victory, Tashfin was called to Morocco to lead the army against him. Al-Andalus was left without its defenders. Tashfin, along with a Catalan mercenary leader, put up a good defense, but more and more tribes were defecting to the Almohad. Ali ibn Yusuf ibn Tashfin died in 1143 CE, leaving the empire to his son, Tashfin ibn Ali. Tashfin was more energetic than his father had been. However, the empire was beyond saving now. One after the other, Almoravids were losing allies. The bulk of their army had been made up of the Sanhaja and Masmuda tribes. After the Masmuda left, the Sanhaja started to break apart and old rivalries started to appear. Tashfin ibn Ali himself was killed in 1145 CE. There was finally an opening to take the capital. In March of 1147 CE, Marrakesh fell to the Almohad. By 1148 CE, the rest of their holdings were taken over. The Almoravids were no more. There were still some cities in Al-Andalus that were held by governors loyal to the Almoravids, but overall they had lost. Even before the fall of Marrakesh, Taifas were once again starting to appear in Al-Andalus. Some of these Taifas were born out of revolts against the Almoravids. Some were simply trying to take advantage of the collapse of a central power. One such man was named Muhammad ibn Sa'd ibn Mardanish. In 1147 CE, he took over Marsiya and established power there. He even signed treaties with the Christians around him. Castile even provided troops to him. There were other similar independent lords resisting the Almohad when they would finally enter. Another party taking advantage of the collapse of a central power were the Christians. Alfonso VII, the grandson of the Alfonso who had conquered Toledo, led armies deep into Al-Andalus. In 1147 CE, he forced Córdoba into accepting his overlordship. In the same year, Almeria fell to an alliance of Christians which included Alfonso VII of Leon Castile, Ramon Berenger IV of Aragon Catalonia, and Sancho Ramirez IV of Navarre and the Genoese who served as a naval power. Other cities like Santarém on the Tagus, Lisbon, Tortosa, Lleida, Calatrava, and Fraga were also taken soon after. Over 4 centuries of Muslim rule in Ebro Valley was put to an end. The first Almohad army in Al-Andalus came to defeat some governors loyal to the Almoravids. By 1148 CE, the Almoravid hold of Seville was broken, and Taifas like Beja and Badajoz had sworn obedience to Almohad. It was at this point that the Almohads were challenged by a rebellion by some local tribes in Morocco. These tribes managed to gain widespread support and even managed to take some important cities like Siura and Sijil Masa. However, the revolt was short-lived and was quickly defeated. Abdul-Mumin declared that he would bring some administrative reforms to remove oppressive and impious governors and leaders from power. This resulted in a massive purge and execution of over 30,000 people. This, as you might expect, scared the governors who had sworn allegiance to the Almohad. Al-Andalus became unstable and the Almohad were unsure of their control there. Not to mention there were still some Almoravid loyalists there, and the Christians to the north were eager to gain some new land. Córdoba itself was under threat from Alfonso VII. Even though the city was a mere shadow of its former self, it was still an important city, and its fall would effectively mean the end of Muslim existence in Al-Andalus. Abdul-Mumin called on his allies in Al-Andalus and told them to defend the city. This was a success, and the people of Córdoba accepted the Almohad for this. To secure his hold over Al-Andalus, Abdul-Mumin invited the governors of Córdoba to his capital and incorporated them into the elites of Almohad. After this, from 1150 to 1155, Abdul-Mumin was preoccupied with northern Africa and left Al-Andalus to his governors there. Abdul-Mumin led a campaign to consolidate his hold over Maghrib and expanded into what is now Algeria. He defeated some Arab tribes there, namely Banu Hilal and Banu Riya. These tribes were then moved to Morocco to provide troops for the army. While effective in battle, they were poorly disciplined and were unreliable. This was the start of the Arabization of Maghrib. Abdul-Mumin now moved to secure power for his dynasty. At this point, his mentor Ibn Tumart's brothers were claiming the right to rule. However, Abdul-Mumin declared his son Muhammad to be his heir, effectively ending any ambiguity in the matter of succession. He also put his other sons, of whom there were 14, as governors of various important cities and provinces. Mostly this was peaceful because the old elites were intimidated by the previous purge and didn't want to contribute to Abdul-Mumin's number of total kills. These princes were called Sayyids. Important cities like Seville, Malaga, Algeciras, Ceuta, Tangier, Tlemcen, and Fez were given to them. With the Sayyids being installed in Al-Andalus, a new phase for Almohad rule in Al-Andalus began. First, they were determined to secure their borders. Granada, the last Almoravid stronghold, was handed over to the Almohad in 1156 CE. In 1157, Almohad laid siege to Almeria. Alfonso VII and Ibn Mardanish tried to relieve the city but failed. The city was surrendered. Alfonso VII died on the way back from there. Christian garrisons in Ubeda and Baiza were abandoned as well. Alfonso's death caused his kingdom of Leon Castile to be split up. Leon, the smaller of the two, was often willing to ally with Muslims to protect itself from Castile and Portugal. Abdul-Mumin was still focused on Africa. Most of Tunisia's major coastal cities were occupied by Normans from Sicily. In 1159 CE, Tunis fell. In January 1160 CE, the major city of Al-Mahdiya, the once capital of the Fatimids, fell as well. Abdul Mumin made his way back to Morocco and brought more Arab tribes along. At the same time, Ibn Mardanish was in the middle of besieging Cordoba, raving and unhinged by wine, as one historian writes. However, to be fair, everyone associated with Christians was usually accused of drunkenness. The city looked like it would fall, and its fall would have been a deadly blow to the Almohad. The ruler of Cordoba hatched a scheme to prevent that. He disguised one of his servants as an oil merchant and gave him a forged letter from an Andalusian nobleman, Sidre ibn Wazir in Seville. The letter said that Ibn Mardanish should abandon the siege of Cordoba and attack Seville instead. Almohad footing in Al-Andalus was weak at the time, and Ibn Mardanish considered it an opportunity. However, when he arrived in Seville, he found it fortified. In November of the same year, Abdul Mumin arrived in Al-Andalus. He had ordered his sons to build fortifications on Gibraltar. From this place, he was to supervise Al-Andalus and return to Morocco, if the need should arise. The court at Granada is said to have been a splendid affair. Something, had it existed in Christian Europe, would have had poems and paintings depicting it. However, while it was clearly a sight to behold, Abdul Mumin's court at Granada didn't achieve much. In fact, he left soon after and sent a small force to Cordoba to garrison there and prevent further attacks. In 1162 CE, around 2 years after Abdul Mumin left, Ibn Hamushk, the father-in-law and fellow independent ruler of Ibn Mardanish, attacked Granada. The story goes that he was let into the city by a Jew, who was displeased because he was forced to convert to Islam. Ibn Hamushk managed to defeat the Almohad there and forced them to garrison on a hill from where they pleaded Abdul Mumin for help. Ibn Hamushk also wrote to Ibn Mardanish to reinforce his attack. Ibn Mardanish arrived with his men and some 1,000 Christian horsemen. When news reached Abdul Mumin, he sent his son, Sayyid Uthman, who along with forces from Seville met the attacking force outside Granada. Perhaps baffled by the presence of Ibn Mardanish when he was only expecting Ibn Hamushk, the Almohad suffered a humiliating defeat. Abdul Mumin could not let this defeat go unanswered and sent an army, around 20,000 strong, under the command of another one of his sons. This army managed to surprise Ibn Hamushk at night. A large number of casualties were suffered by both Ibn Hamushk and Ibn Mardanish, who had to abandon their siege. Abdul Mumin, proud of this victory and confident of advancing the borders of Al-Andalus, moved the capital of Al-Andalus from Seville to Cordoba. Cordoba had been in ruins since the fall of Almoravids. At one point there were only 82 men in the city. This move was certainly going to bring life back to this important city, perhaps the heart of Muslim Spain. At the same time, Granada, the hump of Al-Andalus, so called because the hump of the camel is said to be the most delicious part, was put into repairs. Apparently, the supplies were so low in Al-Andalus that Granada's supplies like food and weaponry was brought from Morocco. Abdul Mumin died the next year. As Hugh Kennedy writes, the Caliph died in May 1163 in Rabat, while collecting troops for a major expedition to Al-Andalus. He had long contemplated but never undertaken. Ibn Sahib al-Salat says that there were numbered 100,000 horses and 100,000 foot, and their camp stretched as far as the spring at Gabula, some 19 kilometers from Rabat. If the numbers are anything like correct, it was much the biggest army the Almohad had assembled. According to Andalusi Lord Sidre ibn Wazir, who was present, the intention was to launch a four-pronged attack against Portugal at Coimbra, Leon at Ciudad Rodrigo, and Castile at Toledo and Barcelona. The Caliph's death probably saved the Christians from a major invasion, though it is hard to see that such a large and diverse army would have been very effective, and the problems of finding supplies would have been enormous. See you next time.